TopMedTalk.
Well, hello and welcome to TopMedTalk. We are at ANZCA, the Australian New Zealand College of Anaesthetists and Faculty of Pain Medicine annual scientific meeting in Sydney, Australia. I'm Desiree, Chappell, your host, not in Sydney, Australia. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, joining this meeting virtually. But there on the ground is my co-host, my partner in crime, Monty Mythen. Hello, Monty.
Hi, Desiree. We're missing you here. Lots of friends say hi. A very long list of people say hi. There was a wonderful ceremony yesterday evening where lots of new fellows, over 200 fellows, joined the college. It was a long but wonderful ceremony, extremely well done, and then an amazing party at the New South Wales Art Gallery, which I left early because I knew we had to do interviews this morning, but it was extremely good.
Because you were going to be busy today, Monty.
Yeah.
You were very busy yesterday. We did 4 different interviews yesterday, so it was great.
It was good. I was getting tired of people saying, "Where's Desiree?" That's the whole conversation.
Sure.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. So lots of
Now you know how I feel, Monty, whenever I'm by myself and everyone's like, "Where's Monty? Where's Monty?" No.
So Desiree, you just come back from a derby party. Is that right?
Yeah, so you're pronouncing that incorrectly.
Okay.
It's the Derby.
Have it your own way.
Yeah, the Derby. It was the 149th running of the Kentucky Derby here in Louisville, Kentucky at Churchill Downs. And I didn't actually go to the Derby, but if you don't go to the Derby, then you have to basically go to a Derby party. So I just came from a big group of friends that we've been together every year for the last probably 10 years. So it was a lot of fun, and maybe not as fun as Sydney, but it's a bit of a toss-up right now.
We'll get our guests' views on that in a second. But it sounds pretty balanced to me. I'd say balanced.
Yeah, I would say. Monty, before we start this conversation, though, I do want to give a huge thank you to ANZCA and 3M for supporting you to be able to be there on the ground in that beautiful booth. It is absolutely gorgeous. And what a great space to do TopMedTalk and be able to transmit and join globally from all over the world.
Yeah, it's a real treat. Very generous. Thank you very much indeed. And we had I just listened again to some of the conversations yesterday. Luckily, I didn't have to say very much. Wonderful conversations. Very rich, eclectic mix.
Yeah. And we love, we've done a lot with Australian, New Zealand college and conversations with friends there down in Australia. I think this next one is going to be really interesting, Monty. A lot of what we talk about on TopMedTalk about perioperative care and the system of care. So I'm going to let you take the reins and introduce our guests there who are at the TopMedTalk booth.
Well, I'll start with Dr. Jill Van Acker, who's been with us on TopMedTalk before. And Jill, you have we're going to be discussing perioperative care, perioperative medicine in the broadest sense. You have a particular role in that space, which we'll come to in a moment. But first of all, where do you hail from? Where do you work at the moment? What do you do?
Okay. So I'm a specialist anaesthetist. I work in Canberra, Australia, which is, for the foreigners, not always a well-known spot. And
is that the capital?
It is the capital, okay. But, I guess it's, I think it came about with the war between Sydney and Melbourne to where would be, the main centre, political centre, and then they just had to create another place. So it's a very nice place to live, very outdoorsy. I love it. Great to raise children. And we're kind of strategically placed between the beach and the snow. Sounds
awful. Oh. Do you have a derby or a derby there? No, unnecessary question.
No, so
you're at the role. You have this SIG. This what does that stand for, and what's your role in it?
Yep. So we have what we call a binational perioperative medicine special interest group, which is actually supported by ACE, which is a tripartite group between ANZCA, the ASA, and the NZSA. I'm pretty sure that was originally started, the perioperative one was originally started by Vanessa Beavers, our immediate past president. So as you know, she's been the major force and has been for nearly 20 years behind getting perioperative care and perioperative medicine established in Australia and New Zealand, and I've really only been involved in the last decade. But it's been a very exciting time to be part of that movement, and I think very much so an essential change from our paternalistic kind of clinician-centred care, which was always reactive, to a more proactive patient-centred model of care. That really is perioperative medicine. Yes, so here we are.
So for those of us around the world who have been interested in perioperative medicine for decades now, many of us sort of regard the sort of modern movement. You can go back a little bit further, perhaps in the USA, and talk about people kicking the name around, but not really doing that much about it. Is we would look to Australia in particular and New Zealand, but Ross Kerridge was the first person who I saw write about perioperative medicine, and it seems to the rest of us outside of Australia and New Zealand that you kind of got on with it. Is that a fair reflection?
Yes, I think that's pretty true. I think we've had some big forces, including Ross Kerridge and Vanessa in the college, who've kind of pushed this movement along, and we've had several strategic meetings to try and see what needed to be done, and then the college has really has been quite progressive, I would say, in putting a lot of resources behind developing perioperative medicine further and establishing it within Australia and New Zealand. And now with the diploma of perioperative medicine, I would say that's kind of a first in the world. So I think we're very proud of that.
And we heard about that yesterday. So those folks who are listening who haven't had a chance, they can listen to the discussions we had with Vanessa Beavis, the immediate past president, about the launch of the Diploma in Perioperative Medicine, DIPPOM, if they want to look that up, and there'll be some links in the show notes later on. So we'll park that one for a second. That's a real tangible example of a clinical qualification, multidisciplinary in perioperative medicine. So that's real global progress, I would suggest. But on the ground at the moment, if we look at the three phases, if we think of it from the moment of contemplation to full recovery, in the preoperative bit, we'll ignore the intra and post for a second. In the preoperative bit, how much sort of prehabilitation, or however we choose to describe what that looks like, is really happening?
Yeah, so I think from an actual clinical, on the frontline workers in this space, with the perioperative special interest group, I think we've all been perioperative enthusiasts, and so you come together and you think, oh, this is what everyone is doing, but that's really not the case. Also, I think there's been a lack of funding for especially in the public hospitals to support a perioperative role. And really, what has had to happen is that most places, when there is a perioperative enthusiast, that we've had to shuffle kind of funding around to allow for something like either preoperative high-risk clinics, such as Louise has established, involving optimization and identification of high-risk patients, and some prehabilitation. It's definitely not something that's automatically funded, and it's very difficult, what we've found talking to clinicians, to establish the learnings and the workings of this when there is no this is kind of a new role and there's no real specific funding for it. When most of the time, your administrator wants the anaesthetist in the operating theatre, not using funding to be in the preoperative clinic and doing this other work.
So these are common, I'll bring you in a second, Desiree, common discussion points around the world. But do you think that people have seen the value proposition? It's just they're not quite prepared to invest to get the return on the value proposition?
Yeah, I mean, some of us obviously have been able to convince our exec to establish these clinics, so they have seen the value. I think what's happened too often is that it's all, I'm doing it there, Louise is doing it in New Zealand. There's not been a coordinated package where we can say to governments, look, this is actually the value proposition, this is what we propose, and and have that kind of support, the national support for it. I think that's probably lacking.
And mixed in with that is the current global tension of actually we'd like everyone who's an anaesthetist to go and give anaesthetics.
Because the waiting lists are,
And all this preparation stuff is a nice idea, but could you just get on with it for now? We'll come back to that in a few years' time.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
Desiree,
definitely.
some questions for Jill before we bring our next guest in.
Well, Monty, I was right along the same lines as the value proposition. I think building that for the hospitals, the systems, the execs to say, like, this is important. If we do this, it really does. It is the value of something, not the cost of something. And Monty and I have talked a lot about that. Like, we know that this is an investment, but your ROI, the value of what we bring to bear is actually way more than the cost, but it's really hard to make that case right now whenever we literally can't make our lists, right? And can't fill the seats. One of the questions that I had too is, all of us are enthusiasts, right? So it's a bit of an echo chamber for some of us, Jill and Louise, I would say. What is the value proposition, do you think, for our colleagues in anesthesia and really beyond that, even the world of surgeons and other providers? Like, how are you building that value proposition?
The college has also got this perioperative medicine economic working group going at the moment. It's chaired by Dr. Sean McManus and Professor Guy Ludbrook. And I think initially when we started out, it was really about, trying to find the pure economic value. But I guess when you're talking about the value proposition, we are talking about much more than just the economic value and the cost savings. How do you put a value on the patient or the family feeling heard and being part of that, of the decision making, and having a good outcome at the end of it. So I think most of our surgical colleagues are pretty quickly on board when we talk about what we can add to their patient's perioperative journey, and that's not just a dollar cost value. I think that's probably the main thing, that we're not just looking at it from a purely financial point of view.
And enhanced surgical recovery, ERAS, whatever you choose to call it, overlaps a lot with perioperative medicine, doesn't it? And does seem to have got global traction. So the principles of enhanced recovery seem to have got pretty good global traction. I said the 3 phases, so the bit in the prep, the meticulous care intraoperatively, reduce your number of opioids, effective pain relief, excellent hemodynamic fluid management, get people drinking, eating, moving straight away. But there's also the post-op bit where there's been a bit of a void, the sort of what happens if you go back to the floor. And we just noticed Guy Ludbrook just published a paper in JAMA Surgery where by applying more resources in the immediate post-operative period, it appears as though things get a lot better. Where you work, do they do all 3 components of that? Or because most places do like 1 from 3 or 2 from 3, but 3 from 3 is unusual. Yeah,
it's very unusual. I think Guy's work is extremely valuable, and hopefully we will be able to use that to kind of introduce that where I work. But that's currently not the case. It's mainly the preoperative and intraoperative thing. I think it's important as well. I mean, the communication across is very important as well, isn't it? You do the preoperative assessment and risk stratification, and that's great. But you want to make sure that that's visible all along the patient journey as well, and that handover to the next kind of team and the next team along is kind of essential, really. So we had kind of a nice little project going where we'd kind of fill in a little handover sheet with the really main points, whether with the major organs like kidneys, brain health, heart, and respiratory, and if patients were high risk at one of the other, identifying that very early, trying to optimise it before, and then introducing risk reduction bundles. But again, post-operatively, the early recognition on the ward of any of those things happening, or trying to prevent it as well. But we definitely don't have that advanced recovery room model at this point in time. I think you also need to have a certain throughput of patients, or you have to have a certain number of patients that you can that qualify to be put in that post-operative environment to give you the cost savings.
Because it's really somebody who until recently worked mainly in surgical intensive care and sort of enhanced post-operative recovery environments. Probably one of the most depressing days out is when somebody's been so beautifully prepared and wonderfully looked after. Then they go back to the floor, and 3 days later you get the Mets call, and then they come back into intensive care. And the other tragedy with that is you're allowed then to spend any money you want at all. There's no limits on the amount of money you're allowed to spend once you readmit them to intensive care.
Could have prevented that.
Exactly. Desiree, is this familiar to you? We'll bring in our next guest in a second to pick up on this because she's an expert in that space.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was going to say too. I'd love to hear the opinion of Louise, but yeah, I mean, very familiar. I think that we've spent a lot of time in the world of anesthesia where I believe that perioperative medicine, kind of the coined phrase, has really been born out of. And, I think in anesthesia, at least in the US, really trying to take the lead on. And of course, we're always going to focus on the intra-op phase and the pre-op phase. But I don't know how it is for you guys in Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of the country. But for us, production pressure, because of lack of staffing, all of those things, it's kind of like, hey, I did my job. They're tucked in the post-anesthesia recovery unit. They look beautiful. And then everything post-operatively, it's just kind of, it's like they just are on their own a little bit. So I would love to see, when we talk about peri-op, that we truly talk about it from the continuum of care. I think it's really interesting, but I do feel like there's still a lot of value, Monty, of focusing on, preparing our patients, because we know we have a little bit of time. Even here in the US, whenever we mill our patients through a little bit quickly, I still think that there's definitely value to that.
So our second guest is Louise Speedy. Louise, welcome. Thank you for coming. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into further conversations about this subject?
Sure. So I'm an intensive care specialist and anaesthetist in Hawke's Bay Hospital in the North Island of New Zealand. And I also practice military medicine with the New Zealand Army. So most of my time, 3/4 of my time, I'm ICU. And then 1 week a month, I walk down the corridor and put my anaesthetic hat on. And really my interest in perioperative medicine is largely because of what we learn about our patients, often from their families, once they've had their unplanned post-op ICU admission, or perhaps it was a planned HDU level admission and they've now deteriorated in their ICU. And really the number of times when you talk to families, or if you're lucky, the patient in the recovery period, and realise that what they hoped for from their surgery and what their life is like is so different to what the team looking after them and putting them through the surgical process was aiming for. And not, that's done with the best will in the world, but actually it's a lack of appropriate conversation to explore what does life look like, what do they want, can we actually achieve that, and actually is surgery the right option at all?
So Louise, can you expand on that? It sounds as though you do a clinic for high-risk patients. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. We do a shared decision-making clinic. And the goal is to take a step back, have a conversation with the patient and their family, and establish what does life look like, what do you understand of your health, what do you want to get out of the surgery, or what do you think the surgery is going to achieve for you? And often we find big gaps there between what we as clinicians, as surgeons, anaesthetists, intensivists think we're going to provide versus what the patient wants. And it's really interesting when you have that conversation about, what are their bottom lines in life? And sometimes those things, some of the cases I presented yesterday, their bottom lines seem very simple, very basic, but actually when you're really comorbid, when your world has become smaller because of your physical limitations, your goals are very different to the goals I might have at the stage of life I'm at. So without that conversation, you really can't establish that. And so I think it's very hard to say that you've got informed consent for these things when actually you've got no idea what the patient's aiming for. And I think with the best will in the world, we unfortunately do a lot of harm. So that was my impetus for setting up our clinic. And for those who do decide that, yes, surgery is the right option for them, a number of those patients, we find surgery is the right option for them. However, unless they can get back to their bottom lines, whether that's being in their own home or being able to maintain independence with their ADLs or being cognitively intact, to have the time with their grandchildren they have, they're really clear, actually, if things aren't tracking towards that endpoint, that's it. I do not want ongoing treatment. So that's another service I think our clinic provides is, yes, some of our patients say, actually, I do want to go ahead. These are my bottom lines, and we talk to them, right, well, I think we should document some limits here and make it clear these are your goals. So if it doesn't go smoothly, the team looking after you meet with your family and discuss and acknowledge, I don't think we're getting towards an endpoint that meets their goals. We potentially need to change trajectory. And I think that's really empowering for our patients.
And your surgical colleagues, because depending on the healthcare environment, I've experienced personally and by conversations around the world that there are some places where our surgical colleagues say thank you for doing that important work so that we can all reach this decision together. There are other environments where they say, you're cancelling my patients. How do they react where you are, Louise?
At both ends of the spectrum.
Okay.
So when you're going into it, that we would have variable buy-in. We have some who are very much on board and some of them who actually are fabulous at doing this, but the structure of their clinic is such they don't have time for this conversation. I've seen them having these conversations acutely in the ICU with our patients and families. So some of them, absolutely, they're on board. They really appreciate and understand the service. And they're also very responsive when we go back to them and say, look, are there any other options? Is there a lesser intervention? What would symptom control be like? What would disease progression be like if we didn't go for the most invasive, most challenging option? Others who are reluctant supporters and I think still take some convincing, and others who've never referred a single patient to us and perhaps never will. It's been suggested by some of our senior surgeons, well, you should just take the patients anyway. We've declined to do that because we really do need them on board. They own the patient, and I'm not without hope. I've certainly seen some change, and I think particularly with the national initiatives in New Zealand, the use of the Aotearoa Serious Illness Conversation Guide and our shared goals of care and the conversations we're teaching junior staff coming through the ranks to have with patients and families, I hope that we get a cultural shift and that actually this becomes part of business as usual.
So, Louise, you mentioned two things there quite quickly. Can you say them again slowly for us, the two initiatives in New Zealand? So
these two initiatives from our Health Quality and Safety Commission, the New Zealand Shared Goals of Care. So it used to be that if you're admitted to a hospital in New Zealand, one of the forms that is completed is a CPR form, either DNA CPR or CPR, so really black and white. Now, that's a really inadequate conversation
so that's
about
resuscitate, do not attempt resuscitate.
Absolutely. That's now changed to a shared goals of care form where actually the most important part of that form is the conversation. What does your life look like? What do you want out of life? And so what treatments will and won't be acceptable to you? And we have 4 sections. So you might be at the top. You might be category A. You're for everything. You don't want any limits. The expectation is that you'll make a full functional recovery, and that's what you want. Or you might be in the not for CPR, and that's actually 3 sections. That might be your B, so you're not for CPR, not for resuscitation. However, you're for all active treatments. The expectation is we can get you back to a state of health acceptable to you. Or maybe you're at C, and actually you want limited active treatment. We don't expect to cure you, but we hope that we can maintain you and get you back to a reasonable state of existence, state of living. Or maybe you're a category D and actually you're for palliative care. And it's a much broader conversation, a much more holistic conversation than we were having previously. We're not perfect at doing that in my institution or other institutions around the country, but we're certainly working on it and trying to train our junior doctors up to have these conversations. So that's one of the initiatives that came out. And the second was the development of the Aotearoa Serious Illness Conversation Guide. So this is a structured guide developed based on the work from Ariadne Labs that enables a clinician to talk.
That's in Boston, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
That's one that the surgeon...
Yes, Atul
Gawande's name's associated with.
Yes, absolutely. And this is it's a really simple guide that a lot of us have sitting in PDF on our phone to whip out, and we say, I hope you don't mind, but this is a really important conversation. I'm going to use a checklist to make sure I don't miss anything. And it's a very simple guide that enables you to explore what do they understand of their health, what do they understand of what we're offering, what does life look like, what's really important to them, what would they not be prepared to live without, and how much would they be prepared to go through for either symptomatic relief or for more time.
One of the first podcasts that myself and Desiree did was with a representative of retired people in the USA, and they shared, it wasn't their quote, but they shared with us the thought that we should always ask a patient not what is the matter with them, but what matters to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is really, I want to dance at my daughter's wedding. That's my goal, which, by the way, I'd love to. Jill, is this resonating with you?
Yeah, definitely. And I was actually thinking a couple of things. One, you kind of said, well, the surgeon owns the patient. I think perhaps it's time to rethink that model where it's the surgeon's card on the above the bed. Who are you suggesting instead? Might the patient own the patient?
Yes,
that would be quite good in the centre of the. And I think we've got this. Another thing that perioperative medicine aims to do is, I think around 2020 there was actually a national policy blueprint that came out about self-care and the importance of self-care, which also has been kind of promoted by the World Health Organization, and shared decision making really kind of is important in that, and empowering the patient to make a decision. I think often I get in my clinic a patient saying, "Oh, I didn't know I had a choice."
Yes.
And I think, okay, we've come so far. You're having surgery in 2 weeks' time, and no one told you that you actually have a choice. It's your body. It's your life. So I think that's always quite confronting. But then I think, well, this is my opportunity to actually help this patient, and maybe it was a good fortune that they came into my clinic. So I think that's important. And then, yes, self-care where more the patient's in the driver's seat, and you are asking them what their goals are for afterwards, and whether that's actually realistic and matching up with what your thoughts are. And facts are about what's going to happen post-operatively.
Well, Desiree, some closing questions or comments from you, because I've just noticed the time, that the area here is getting very busy, and we're just about to start another interview in a few minutes' time. So some closing questions or comments, please.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting conversation, and very poignant. I mean, we talk a lot about this, and who, I think Monty asked who owns the surgery. I think it's hard, because I think that all of us are looking, all the different types of providers are looking at through different lenses, but we don't necessarily put the patient lens on all the time. We're looking at here in the U.S. how to have shared decision, and it's really tough. I mean, who has that conversation? Who ultimately has the end, conversation with that patient to tell them, if you have the surgery, you actually won't be better off. I think it's a hard call, and I would love to hear kind of what the ideas are, and how what you guys are planning kind of in Australia and New Zealand, and through the college, those different types of shared decision conversations and resources that other people from around the world may learn from, or those even in your country may learn from too. So Jill, I know you're part of the SIG. So what are some of the resources that are available for us who are novices, or those who may feel uncomfortable having those conversations kind of start?
I think actually I would refer back to that serious illness conversation guide from New Zealand. That the New Zealand group are using. We've had them do a workshop at our perioperative medicine special interest group, and it is fabulous. I think it's one of the best ways of starting that conversation and getting the information that you actually do require. And a lot of people who feel uncomfortable having that conversation, once they have got familiarised them with that toolkit, it's made it much easier to have that conversation.
So we must bring this wonderful conversation to an end. So Jill, Louise, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Desiree joining us from Louisville, Kentucky on Derby Day. I'm getting around to saying it that way.
Derby. You can say Derby.
We're going to close quickly because we've got two more wonderful guests about to join us to discuss clinical trials networks in Europe and Australasia. So thank you very much indeed for listening. And thank you very much again to ANZCA for allowing us to be here at their ASM. We'll be back with you shortly. Thank you. TopMedTalk.
Thanks for downloading TopMedTalk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.